Hello and welcome to Honey Badger Hangout. My name is Allison Tiemann, otherwise known as Typhon Blue, and with me is Karen Strawn, otherwise known as Girl Writes What, and Hannah Wallen. Before we get started talking about Karen's recent adventures, please go to Honey Badger Radio's Google Plus page and add us to your circles so that you can receive invites to future Hangouts. If you want to interact with Karen, me, Hannah, and Karen, add Honey Badger Radio to your circles. For now, we'll be doing Hangouts with just the three of us through Karen's channel because Karen isn't enough of an asshole to manage you munchkins, but I am. Oh my god! For now, we'll just be doing, so when we have enough minions, I mean a large enough audience, so we'll be sending out invites to the Honey Badger Radio Google Plus page.
Hello.
Go there now and add it to your circles. Link in the low bar. The web address is plus, otherwise known as Girl Writes What, Hannah Wallen. Dot. Before we get started talking about Karen's recent Google, go to Honey Badger Radio's Google Plus page and add us to your so that you can receive invites to future Hangouts. Want to interact with Karen, me, Hannah, and Karen, add Honey Badger Radio to your circle. Now we'll be doing Hangouts with Karen's channel because Karen isn't enough of an asshole to manage, but I am. Badger. Oh my god! Yeah. Brigade.
Okay.
Now we'll
Badger.
So that's out invites to the Honey. Please add us to go there now, whatever it is, and then we can add you back and we can send invites. And also, while you're at it, subscribe to the Honey Badger Radio YouTube channel. The channel address is youtube.com/user/honeybadgerradio. If you want to see us spread more evil in the world, consider donating. The link can be found on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/user/honeybadgerradio. Or alternatively, donate your time. If you have ability with art, we'll put you to work. If you can write, we could use someone to write up news or produce segments for the show. If you can edit or have experience as a blogger or webmaster, we could definitely use someone to help us put our show content up on the website. I have no fucking clue what's going on, Karen. Can anyone hear me? Who knows? But I'm just going to keep going on gamely. We could use a blogger or webmaster. We could definitely use someone to help us put our show content up at the website. We could really use a sound engineer, and if you know how to create an integrated hardware-software radio station that can stream shows online, email us now. The email is honeybadgersplural@gmail.com. That is honeybadgersradio@gmail.com. Now on to Hannah with the news.
Okay, before I go into the news, what just happened?
Okay, so I had a window or I had a tab open that had the actual page for the YouTube broadcast, and yeah, that was totally my fault, and I had no idea. Dean does this repeatedly on the Monday Roundup Hangout, and I was just like, what is going on? I don't even know what's going on, but it's like there's a delay, and it's playing on my speaker, and then it's feeding back in, and it's just like this huge, gigantic gobbledygook of noise, until I went in and I closed off that tab.
Okay.
All right.
We are still live.
Do you want me to read you the beginning segment?
This is why I should not be in charge.
Okay. Do you want? I'll just redo the beginning segment. Sorry to everyone who's signed in. This is completely new format, so we don't know what the hell we're doing if it isn't completely obvious from our previous mistake in which you got to see 25 seconds of us looking like shit. But apparently you preferred to the dubstep hypno badger. So maybe that's a cue that should be our next advertisement. Another half minute of, I don't know, us going to the bathroom or picking our noses.
It cures cancer and it helps with fapping, apparently. So.
Picking your nose?
Well, there are people into that, so Okay, I'm just gonna redo the intro and we'll just take it from the top. Hello and welcome to the Honey Badger Hangout. My name is Allison Tiemann, otherwise known as Typhon Blue, and with me is Karen Strawn, otherwise known as Girl Writes What, and Hannah Wallen. Before we get started talking about Karen's recent adventures, please go to the Honey Badgers Google Plus page and add us to your circle so that you can receive invites to future Hangouts. If you want to interact with Karen, me, Hannah, and Karen, add Honey Badger Radio to your circles. For now, we'll just be doing Hangouts with just the three of us through Karen's YouTube channel because Karen is not enough of an asshole to manage you munchkins, but I am. So when we have enough minions, I mean a large enough audience, we'll be sending out invites to the Honey Badger Radio Google Plus page. Go there now and add it to your circles. Link in the low bar. The web address is plus.google.com/plus honeybadgerradio. That's plus.google.com/plus honeybadgerradio. And the plus is the actual plus, not the word plus, but A plus. Just like this show, A plus. Also subscribe to the Honey Badger the Honey Badger Radio YouTube channel. The channel address is youtube.com/user/honeybadgerradio. If you want to see us spread more evil in the world, consider donating. The link can be found on our YouTube channel. Once again, youtube.com/user/honeybadgerradio. Or alternatively, donate your time. If you have ability with art, we'll put you to work. If you can write, we could use someone to write up our news or produce segments for the show. If you can edit or have experience as a blogger or webmaster, we could definitely use someone to help put our show content up on the website. We could also use a sound engineer. Is that a big surprise? And if you know how to create an integrated hardware-software radio station that can stream shows online, email us now. The email is honeybadgers, plural, radio@gmail.com. That is honeybadgersradio@gmail.com. Now on to Hannah with the news.
For real this time.
Mm-hmm. For real.
Okay. The Don't Be That Guy campaign has raised its ugly head once again, this time in Ottawa. Crime Prevention Ottawa and University of Ottawa's Community Life Service have papered the University of Ottawa campus with bilingual versions of the infamous campaign. Crime Prevention Ottawa defends their decision by saying, quote, "Don't Be That Guy is an internationally successful behavioral marketing campaign developed by Sexual Assault Voices of Edmonton," end quote. The evidence used to defend the use of this sexist campaign is that sexual assault reports dropped 10% in Vancouver in the year the campaign was initiated there. Of course, all other reports of violent crime dropped as well, and then went up a year later. And in Edmonton, the rate of reporting didn't change the year the campaign was initiated, and then it went up. Of course, the people behind the campaign say that the rate of reporting going up means that women feel more comfortable reporting sexual assaults, and if it goes down, it's preventing them. It's a win-win. Crime Prevention Ottawa also says, quote, "The vast majority of men do not commit sexual assault. When they are engaged in ending sexual assault, true progress can be made," end quote. If the vast majority of men do not commit sexual assault, how can engaging them in ending it do anything, much less make progress? When the sexism is directed against women instead, feminists are quick to cry foul, as they did when the Don't Be That Girl campaign was in Edmonton. If there is anyone in the Honey Badger audience who is in Ottawa, in particular a student of the University of Ottawa, and is willing to conduct a counter-campaign using the Don't Be That Girl poster, please drop us a line at honeybadgersbrigade@gmail.com. That's honeybadgersbrigade@gmail.com. Back to you, Allison.
Okay, thank you, Hannah. And now we're on to Karen with the news from Edmonton. Go ahead,
news
Karen.
from Edmonton is that hi. News from Edmonton is that Eric Duckman, our wandering correspondent and a patriarchal overlord, wanted to attend and film a seminar on men in feminism that was going to be put on at the University of Alberta by Dr. Lise Gotel, the head of women's studies at that university, and Barrett Weber, a instructor of sociology there. And he requested, he basically let it be known that he wanted to attend. He was not interested in disrupting the seminar or the lecture or whatever it was, but he wanted to film the event. He was referred to the basically the administration of the university, who then told him that he had to have essentially $3 million in liability insurance in order to be allowed to film the event. I have the feeling that they would not impose this on anyone other than a professional videographer unless there was an ideological or political reason to, considering that this would apply to selfies taken by cell phones at people's graduations. So, you know, like, you're not going to have $3 million worth of insurance to take a photo of yourself and your friends at a grad dinner or, you know, at an event. Anyhow, so Nick has announced that he is not planning to attend, that he does not want anyone to go and attend or film or anything, but that he is very, very much interested, and he would think that the people putting on this event would also be interested in having their message in their own words being broadcast to a wide audience. So he's challenged them to film their event and post it on YouTube so that everybody can see and hear what they're all about and make whatever judgments that they see fit, right? This is really the thing. We want feminism's message in feminists' own words to be disseminated as widely as possible. Having feminists say what they believe in their own words is excellent as far as we're concerned. It's wonderful. It's the propagation of public debate, right? So he's not interested in shutting anything down. He's not interested in anybody going and making trouble. He just wants to challenge the people putting on this seminar to publicize what they're doing, and hopefully that will happen, and hopefully there will be a video up on YouTube showing everybody what it is that they're doing. I mean, like, I would hope that they don't have some kind of cloister of secrecy around what they do and what they teach, because that would be kind of like cultish behavior. So, yeah.
No, you think so?
Anyhow, back to you guys.
Yeah, like, don't you want
just a little bit?
Don't you want your message to be spread as wide and as far as possible, feminists? That's all we want to do, is we want to show people what you have to say. I don't know why you're so against that. So anyway, everybody is eagerly awaiting this part of the show. Karen, give us the highlights from your. Do you want to start with Ryerson or with?
With just ask me a question and about either one, and I'm happy to answer. So.
No, I'm trying to figure out if I want to go for the really juicy one, or if we just work up to it and leave it in anticipation. But I'll start with Ryerson. Give us a rundown on Ryerson, how that went.
Okay, Ryerson was it was a bit of a debacle. That was my fault. Kind of like the opening to this show was a debacle. My fault. It's the reason why I shouldn't be left in charge of logistical anything. You know, I missed my flight. I got to the venue about 5 minutes before it was scheduled to start, and so that was a lot of fun. Spent all day in an airport with nothing decent to eat, and then arrived in a rush. But the people who organized the event, Cafe, were awesome. Justin Trottier was awesome. Adam McPhee, a wonderful guy. I'd met both of them before. I'd spent a lot of time with Adam.
Just a second, Karen. Cafe is the Canadian Association for Equality. So just so people know who aren't familiar with CAFE know what that stands for. It's an acronym. Canadian Association for Equality. They do some really great work. They've been putting on men's issues seminars in Toronto. In Toronto. So, and there's a huge history if you want to Google it. But go on, Karen. I just wanted to make sure people know what you're referring to.
No, they haven't just been putting on events in Toronto. They've actually they've announced a plan to put on events in 8 different universities across Canada in the coming years. So starting with Ryerson and moving from there. So they're definitely trying to make major inroads into the campus scene. And it was a nice big audience. There was a bit of a kerfuffle prior to my event where there was a security fee imposed. The university later decided that they were going to absorb on behalf of the administration, right? That the university said, okay, we'll pay it, rather than forcing you guys to pay almost $2,000, including taxes, for the additional security because our students can't behave themselves. Right, you guys can behave yourselves, but our students are incapable. They changed our venue. We had originally booked a large venue that I think seated up to 400 people, and then they switched the venue to one that only had 100-person capacity. And they were nice enough to give us an overflow room for about another 100 people. And it was actually kind of almost better because it was on the 7th floor of a building where there were no classes being taken at the time, right? So no classes in that building at the time. And on the 7th floor, so security could keep any, upstarts and ruffians out of the building. And they could keep an eye out on the fire alarms, and if somebody had pulled the fire alarm, it wouldn't have disrupted anybody writing their exams. One of the things I think at the Nathanson and Young talk was that a bunch of students piled out of the building when the fire alarm got pulled, and so that they were in the middle of an exam. And that's really, really unfair to those students that they had that huge interruption in the middle of an exam. The crowd was really, really overwhelmingly positive. There were a couple of sort of people challenging my ideas in the question and answer session, but nothing that was unexpected. So, yeah. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I found interesting was a self-proclaimed lesbian feminist. She opened her, I guess, diatribe with, "I find it ironic that you call Naomi Wolf feminist when she's actually a rape apologist." She blamed the victims in Julian Assange's rape case for their own rapes. So, yeah.
Okay. So did you encounter any feminist censorship or protests at the conference?
I didn't. Well, no, not at the Ryerson thing. No. The Ryerson thing, there were feminist protests, but they have changed their tactics. At Miles Groth's talk, they protested at the exact same moment that his talk was going down, but they were protesting something completely different. They were not protesting his talk. They were protesting David Gilmour, professor at the University of Ottawa, I think, who had said that he does not include female written books in his literature, in his English literature syllabus.
Oh, yeah,
and that's just because. Yeah, it is apparently because he just doesn't relate to those types of books, and he says he wants to teach what he knows. And I suppose maybe he's trying to avoid accusations of mansplaining female authors. So, they were protesting something different. And with me, they were protesting, God, I don't even remember what it was, Vladimir Putin's policies on gays. running up to the Olympics. So at 7 o'clock on the dot, they assembled outside the building that I was speaking at to protest Vladimir Putin's policy on gays, right? And, that is because they know if they protest us, they're going to draw attention to us. If they protest something else, they're going to pull cameras away from us, right? So that's really where they're at now, is they're not going to protest us anymore. They're going to, anytime we show up somewhere, they're going to go there and protest, I don't know, like you should spay and neuter your dogs. We're going to hold up picket signs.
That's
draw attention away.
Cis-sexism to spay and neuter your dogs. Maybe your male dogs want to be spayed and your female dog, no. Which is it? Spaying is male dogs?
No. Spaying is female.
Well, castrating is male and spaying is female, so
Okay.
Neutering would apply to both.
Well, who's to say that your male dogs want to be spayed versus being neutered, I mean, have you asked them?
I absolutely think that dogs should have a right to decide for themselves whether they want to be spayed or neutered.
Yeah, and it shouldn't be contingent on bio-truths like the type of genitals that they actually have. Anyway, this is going dark places, so let's get out of there. Birth of Serpents asks us a question. Do you think more men and women are catching on to feminists' false front of equality? So again, do you think more men and women are catching on to feminism's false front of equality?
I don't know that more people are catching on. I think that more people are feeling safe to talk about it. They're finding a place outside of traditionalism to talk about it. That's a really huge thing. Is there are a lot of people who don't agree or who find all kinds of hypocrisy and double standards in feminism, who aren't necessarily in favor of a traditionalist or a conservative point of view, and they didn't really have anywhere to go with that. There was no sort of group or whatever. Not until the internet sort of gave people a place where like, oh my goodness, there's people who think like I do. We're anti-traditionalist, but we think feminism is full of shit, right? So I think that might be just feeling safe and feeling like there are other people who think like you. I think that has a lot to do with it. A lot of it has to do too with just how completely obscenely out of control feminism has become. It's sort of like if you want to expose Christianity for being a fraud or being invalid, you don't show people, you don't show people like your neighborhood Protestant church. You show them the Westboro Baptist Church, right? So that's what you do, because those are the people who are going to expose the belief system as being completely batshit insane. So, Hannah?
I think among the grassroots of feminism, where the people that don't actually necessarily understand or know what they're supporting, but like the idea of equality and they like the idea of feminism as it's been described to them, as they start going through women's studies classes and they start listening to these people talk on television and they start seeing some of these incidents and everything, the protests, the fire alarm pulling, they're starting to have to question their movement, and some of them are becoming extremely uncomfortable with it. They're not necessarily all responding with intellectual honesty, but at least a couple of times a week I get into an argument with somebody who hasn't really done anything related to feminism, but calls themselves a feminist, and tells me how wonderful it is, and has zero clue of any of its history, any of the activities of mainstream feminists, the feminists that actually do something. And by the end of the conversation, it either goes two ways. Either they're burying their head in the sand and saying, I'm not listening to you because you're talking bad about feminism, or they're saying, maybe I should start calling myself egalitarian or something humanist, something else. I'm starting to not like this name. And it seems like what I'm getting there is 20-something, college-age students that have grown up with the romanticized idea of feminism and are starting to realize that maybe it's not everything that they've been taught.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. I really would. Go ahead.
Well, I would say that I think a lot of people are catching on to the fact that feminism really isn't about equality, and I think it's in a big way. I think in many ways a lot of women, an unexpected amount of women, are catching on to it. And I think they're starting to understand my point of view, that feminism really removes women's agency. You really can't remove a person's agency, but you can sure as hell put out a lot of misdirection and smoke and bullshit and make it harder for a person to understand what's going wrong in their lives, or why things aren't clicking for them. And that's essentially what feminism does for women, by giving them these constant excuses to abdicate their agency. And simultaneously, we live in a society where the person with the most control over a woman's life is the woman herself. So if you're creating a situation where a person has complete control over their life and absolutely constantly being told that she has no real control over her life, it's a disaster. It's like, and when I say this, I'm not downplaying the misandry, because the misandry of feminism is the most important part. What feminism does to men, and these tradition, in a lot of cases, the traditional damseling white knight concept of gender does to men is the important part. But on the other hand, it also creates a situation where women do not have the tools to manage the fact that they are the ones with the most control over their lives now. And now, basically, any woman in this society is going to have exactly the life that she has, that manifests of her own choices. And if you create a situation where you sever the consequences of the woman's choices from her choices, essentially you're creating an incredibly self-destructive generation of people who learn nothing, advance to nowhere, and destroy themselves. And I think a lot of women are waking up to that. Sorry, go ahead.
It's a moral hazard. It's a moral hazard to say you have 100% unilateral decision-making, power, but somebody else is going to bear part or all of the consequences of your decisions. You do not raise a responsible generation of people by not holding, by imposing the consequences of one group's decisions onto another, or one person's decisions onto another. You also don't foster a sense of responsibility, of real responsibility, in the group that's having those consequences imposed on them without any kind of choice, right? They don't have a realistic view of responsibility either, right? They're stuck with zero choice, and some or all of the consequences for other people's choices. That's not responsibility. That is, I would argue that could be classified as oppression, as much as I hate to bandy that word around. So.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's almost like a non-life, to live a life without consequences. It's its own kind of existential prison, and I feel like we're wasting a lot of potential by allowing women to live lives without any consequences. And feminism really aids and abets this. It assists in creating this huge arcing mythology of how men are so very, very powerful and women so very, very beholden to men. The only thing they can do, well, the only choice they have is to beg men to not do shit to them. And I mean, and maybe if they're feeling a little sassy, they can demand it with a little pout. Oh, why won't you do what I want? Bam, bam. You know, like a little childish temper tantrum. And that's the role that feminism has women play in our society, is always beseeching men to not use their incredible godly powers to literally control women's minds. I've seen feminists actually literally say that men control women's minds. Of course, this was a male feminist, so I don't know what exactly he was on, but he did say this. And it's
there was one at Betty something or other. Dean Esme did a video about her where he was pretending to be a New Zealand male feminist, right? And she apparently she said that men colonize women's minds. They colonize women's minds.
yes,
right.
they colonize.
It makes them sound like
How does that work? Well, and it makes women sound like willing dupes, right? Like
dumb as a
you know, it makes women sound like my younger stepson, who, you know, his older brother could have talked him into just about anything, and he'd go along with it because his older brother was a total salesman and shyster, even at age 8, right? And his little brother was his willing dupe who always regretted buying into the scam, right? And it's like, but the kid was 4 years old. Eventually he learned, right? But you know, the whole premise.
The idea that
Go ahead.
the idea that we as women are capable of learning and progressing and doing for ourselves and taking care of ourselves was supposed to be, it was a claim that feminists had of their movement. Oh, we believe this, we assert this, and they've turned around and everything they say now denies it. The idea that that we can figure out ways to provide for our own safety. The idea that we might be able to recover from any kind of trauma or setback in life. You can't get divorced without needing alimony. You can't, if you get raped, you're going to be scarred for life, and you'll always have to deal with these trigger warnings and and all these. Anything that you see might set it off, and you'll have another traumatic episode. And it's, if you do have recovery, you're betraying the movement. And it's the idea that we have to be helpless. If we're not helpless, then we cannot be basically exploited for political and social victim cred by the movement.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's the whole thing. Is it's a racket of exploitation of worthy victims, right? So the white woman who was going to be captured and sold into white slavery by the Arab or by the Jew or by the African, right? There, he was going to take her and you know, use her and defile her, right? She's a worthy victim because she's a white woman, right? That's really what it is, and you know, and she's more worthy. The more helpless she is, the more worthy she seems to be. That the more deserving of help, right, and rescue she seems to be in people's minds. So the more agency somebody is perceived to have or be capable of, the less sympathy there is for them. This is just how it works, right? And so, you know, like look at the being that has the least agency of all, a newborn baby, right? And when a newborn baby cries, everybody jumps up and wants to comfort it and soothe it and find out what's wrong and fix it and all of, because we're full of sympathy for this completely helpless creature, right? And the less helpless a child becomes, the less you're willing to give them that overwhelming 100% full-blown sympathy, right? So now it's like they're 3 years old and they're throwing a tantrum and you're like, oh my God, enough is enough, in your room, goodbye, right? Yeah. Because you're willing to actually apply a certain more agency to that 3-year-old child than you are to a newborn. And you know, so women with this the victim thing and the hypo-agency thing, it is a huge it's a huge avenue to power. The power of sympathy, the power of compassion, the power of having people want to rescue you, the power of having people want to do things to help you, right? And feminism does not want to give up any of that. And I mean, I think that they genuinely want women to be seen as agents, but they don't understand how it's a trade-off, right? So they don't understand that you can't see somebody as an agent and feel the kind of sympathy that you do for them when they're entirely a moral patient.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. It's a trade-off.
They don't.
Well, and in some cases, I'd say that they're not understanding that in order to be seen as an agent and to get credit for being an agent, to be treated as an agent, you have to be one. Because a lot of their advocacy on, a lot of their advocacy regarding sexual relations de-identifies women almost, more than their advocacy on the workplace could be considered to agentify women. Even where it does, it's still not as much as they're taking away in other areas.
Well,
you know, I actually think... Go ahead.
The problem with the agentification, so-called feminists trying to see women as having agency, the problem with that... Karen, I think a tab might be open again.
What?
Or it's echoing.
No.
Okay, well, I'll just keep going then. The problem with that is they don't focus on the woman having agency as a person. They focus once again on her abilities coming from being a woman, which is like trying to give a person a sense of agency by telling them that they're getting agency from something passive. Like, you can't do that. You can only say that you can aspire to this. You can't say that you have it because of some passive quality. I mean, you don't... Hard work isn't given to you. It doesn't work like that. You know, you can't get hard work. You have to do hard work. And that's the problem with the feminist attempt to so-called agentify women, is that they're trying to say, well, you are hard work because you are a woman. Well, no woman is hard work. You do hard work. You do hard work because you're a person. You make a personal choice to work hard. You're not just hard work because you're a woman. That doesn't even make any frickin' sense, which is essentially what they're saying. That's if you translate it, what they're doing is literally saying that because you're a woman, you are hard work. And it's gibberish.
Well, not just that. It's not that because as a woman you are hard work. It's as a woman you are hard work that will not be appreciated unless you receive extra help, right, or extra encouragement. Like that there is, like, this is the thing, is they want achievement to be handed to women. They want women to have like a leg up. They want women to have extra help. They want women to have the rules changed for them. They want, women to have all of these things artificially done, like for men to go through their lives with one hand on their cap, like they used to do with polo, where the word handicap came from, right? You're playing polo with one hand on your cap, because men are apparently so much better. They have so much of a head start that we need to actually restrict opportunities for men in order to allow women to succeed. We need men to back down and not put in 100% in order for women to succeed. And how is that portraying women as remotely equal, right? That's just saying women are inferior.
Well, it's essentially...
So,
it's actually kind of doing the same thing to men that they do to women with regard to treating one's agency and other effects in one's life as if it comes from gender. That they treat men as if men's success happens because they're men, not because of what they did to get that success or what they did to earn that success. A man's achievements are no longer meaningful in that context. They're just something he's been given. And it doesn't matter how many hours he worked to get them or how much suffering he went through to get them. And they'll do the same thing with qualities that they consider bad. Like toxic masculinity. The term toxic masculinity is feminist speak for translating bad qualities or not necessarily bad, but destructive, self-destructive, or other destructive tendencies as male tendencies, even if both sexes display them. So it's that same thing of making your gender the factor that determines everything about you. Again, the exact opposite of what they claim.
I'm actually sympathetic to the idea that a person's gender is going to affect the way other people perceive them. I am totally on board with that. I am totally on board with the fact that being a woman will make people take you more seriously in some contexts and less seriously in others, right? And vice versa for men, right? That this is, but I think that this is attributable to sort of a biological, programmed wetware response. It's tied to neoteny. It's tied to sexual dimorphism. It's tied to all kinds of things that we really can't control. So what we need to do is we need to sort of understand that, yeah, it sucks. It sucks when a woman wants to be taken seriously as an authority figure and she's not taken as seriously as a man might be in that position. That might suck, but it also sucks that when a man wants to be taken seriously as somebody in need of help and assistance and sympathy, that he's not going to be taken seriously in that context, right? As seriously as a woman, right? And that also sucks. And that maybe some of these things aren't 100% fixable, right? That maybe they'll always be with us to some degree. As far as our general perceptions of men and women, just based on even something as ridiculous as what we look like, what our facial features look like. But, when you start making these kinds of excuses, like if a woman wants to achieve, there is no barrier now. There is no institutional barrier now. There is nobody saying, you can't apply to this university. There is nobody saying you can't apply for this job. There is nobody saying that anything is legally barred from you attempting to do it, right? Like, there's no institutional barriers anymore. And if women want to start being taken seriously, in as much as they can be, even if some of it is never going to go away, if they want to start being taken seriously as agents, as people, wielding authority, as people who are in charge of their lives, right, and able to take care of themselves, they're going to have to actually demonstrate that, right? And feminism is completely counterproductive in that regard. Feminism is all about helping women, supporting women, encouraging women, giving women extra, lower standards, giving women extra protections, right? That, even though women are the safest demographic from violence in our entire society, we have a Violence Against Women Act in the United States.
Yeah.
right? Because
but Karen,
the demographic that there's not even a Violence Against Children Act.
yeah, that's sickening. But what we that was we've been answering the question. We've been answering Birth of Serpent's question. Do you think more men and women are catching on to feminists' false front of equality? And the answer is yes. And just to sum up what we've been saying, there are no legal or social obstacles for women's success anymore. There's nothing external preventing women from being successful. The only culprit is either now biology or internal decision-making by the women themselves. And we can't do anything about biology, so there's really no point in discussing, well, I mean, there's a point in discussing it, but there's no point if people want to change the situation about women's success. You can't do anything necessarily about biology, but you can do something about this internal problem of women self-selecting themselves out of situations that require greater agency, like being CEOs, like being politicians, like being adventurers. The only thing left that's preventing them is themselves. So we have to look at what is being said about being female, and the biggest culprit is this large organization that says that they want to empower women by essentially telling them that they're incapable of doing anything unless a man enables it. So I think that's where women are learning their helplessness, and it's their helplessness that's preventing their success. Hannah, I'll let you go and make the point, and then we'll move on to the next question.
I was thinking about it. Women really should be pissed as hell about feminism asking for not equality, not taking away the legal standard that says, you know, women can't do this or can't have this, but the extras, the affirmative action for women everywhere. And the reason women should be angry about this is if you look back throughout all of human history at the greatest accomplishments and the greatest achievements of human beings, they happened because people were struggling to overcome hardships. Some of those hardships were discriminatory, some of those hardships were natural, some of those hardships were circumstantial, some of those hardships were a combination of those things. But when you start shoving, well, we'll do this for you. You don't have to work as hard for this. You can have this without struggling for it. At women, what you're doing is you're taking away one of the tools, one of the stepping stones that humanity uses to launch itself upward. And so even though it is the individual's responsibility to do that, to take that step and launch upward, it's still taking away an incentive or a motivator or a tool that we use for that. And it may very well be resulting in women not doing everything women can do simply because they don't have to.
Okay, we're going to move on. Thank you. Karen, thank you, Hannah. We need to move on to the next question, though. This is again from the chat. Karen, during the event, I assume this is referring to the Ryerson event, there were multiple references to men's rights from other women. Do you feel that this was genuine, or was it just lip service because of our pressure?
You know, some of the women that I talk to, it isn't necessarily lip service. It is an acknowledgement that they can't ignore it. Others seem to be really enthusiastic. So, you know, like there is a growing acknowledgement on the part of women that there are these issues. But, you know, I don't. Unless they're feminists, I don't necessarily find it to be lip service. I find it to be maybe grudging in some cases. Like, okay, I have to acknowledge that these issues exist. But that doesn't necessarily take away from the honesty of that assessment, because I think if you have to accept something grudgingly, to be true, then that actually is a greater acknowledgement of the truth when you don't want to accept it, but you have to, because there's just no other way. There's no way to not accept it. So that was more my feel for things. You know, and women will try and turn things back around to women all the time. So will men. There was one commenter, one in the Q&A at Ryerson, who was talking about men being targeted by a specific set of laws regarding landowners, and now women were getting bit in the butt by them. And you know, and it's, well, duh, right? You know, we give the state the authority to make all kinds of rules, and then you think that they're only going to apply to men. Like, you know, it's the law of unintended consequences, and I think a lot of people don't necessarily believe that women are going to get hit by some of these regulations. So,
okay, thank you, Karen. Let's see, let's choose another one. Actually, that ties right into what you were just saying. This is another question from the chat. Is feminism just a reactionary faction that's being managed towards supporting and promoting legislation? Or are they just chipping away at the gender constructs in society? I think this is a good one for both of you, actually.
okay, what are the two options?
Again, the question is feminism just a reactionary faction that is being managed towards supporting and promoting legislation? Or are they just chipping away at the gender constructs in society?
Neither. Neither. Feminism is female nature politicized. It is not an active opposition or deconstruction of gender constructs. It is basically, as far as I'm concerned, what we had all through history was female nature constrained by natural constraints, you know, starvation, scarcity, danger from external sources, hardship, you know, like 14 to 16-hour workdays, right? That was what constrained the female drive to have more, an unfair amount of more. And when there were those constraints in place, it was maybe not an unfair amount of more. It was a necessary amount of more, right? Because women and their childbearing role, right?
Mm-hmm.
But now all of those constraints have been removed, including childbearing, right? And now, so you have what I see as sort of female instinct run amok. And I don't see that as something that is consciously being managed by the state necessarily in order to, you know, get women to give the state more power, get feminists to give the state more power. I think that it's just a happy accident, you know, a happy coincidence that female nature, the extreme forms of female nature, the most female of us, tend to play into actions and lobby efforts that give the state more power and give the state more authority to interfere with people's lives. So, you know, like, but I don't think that it's, and I definitely don't think that they have done a whole lot to deconstruct the real gender roles, the most important ones.
Yeah.
I think feminists exploit gender roles to get the legislation that they want.
Mm-hmm.
You look at how they advocated for the Violence Against Women Act in the United States. It was all about protecting women. It was all about treating men as being responsible for being the protectors. And if they're not living up to that role, and in fact, if they're violating that role, that's like the ultimate social taboo right there. There's no taboo against women hitting men. There's a huge taboo against men hitting women. And so what they did was they went forward with part of the data, not all of the data that they found when they did their studies. Completely ignored all evidence of female-initiated violence, completely ignored all evidence of male suffering of female-initiated violence, and advocated based on this one-sided idea. And they've done the same thing with sex crimes advocacy and advocacy for legislation to make it easier to convict a man accused of a sex crime without necessarily having to prove his guilt. So I think this is, again, they've really exploited these gender roles, and in that they've actually excluded male victims of female perpetrators from their advocacy.
Oh, they've erased them from public consciousness. I mean, like, this is the really hilarious thing, is that people 200 years ago were well aware that there were men that were beaten by their wives, right? There was public awareness of it. There was public action on it. It wasn't a very happy kind of action for the man involved,
No.
but at least the public, the community, acknowledged that it was happening and were willing to do something about it. And they did something about it in a way that shamed him, but that actually also cast shame on her, right? She shared his lowered status in the community. She shared some of the consequences. We don't have that anymore. When feminists came around in the 1960s to tell us that, you know, wife battering was wrong, you know, and to enlighten us all, you know, 1904, Teddy Roosevelt was proposing to bring back the whipping post specifically for men who beat their wives. And the prohibitionists, the Women's Christian Temperance Union, used to go around putting on plays in towns demonstrating that when men drink, they become slackers who don't earn enough money and violent, rapey bastards who beat their wives, right? And this is a huge part of the reason why the American public was willing to prohibit alcohol. And yet, it wasn't until the 1960s when feminists came along to teach us all better that we realized that beating your wife is wrong. Like, you know, like, none of this is new. None of their ideas about any of this stuff are anything we didn't already know. And that's the problem with it, is because it all feels so right to us. It all feels so natural. Of course violence against women is wrong. Of course we notice it when it happens, and we don't notice violence against men because it's natural for us not to notice that or care, right? And so of course we were okay with, you know, it wasn't that women's violence against men was completely invisible to us. We just didn't care. So when they, you know, tricked us into thinking it wasn't happening, we were just like, oh, la 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 la, right? You know, that's what's going on, is they're playing on all of our instincts, and they're playing on all of these deep cultural notions of gender. I mean, like the moral agent, moral patient thing. I mean, like, they exploit the fuck out of that. Right? Mm-hmm. And they get women all kinds of things.
And
they get men to pay because that's what they're supposed to do.
If I were to answer this question, I think that what's going on isn't necessarily entirely biological and has a huge social component. So it does have, there's an element that we can definitely change about it. Because I see the same kind of socialization between men and women that happened in our society that has happened between groups of masters and slaves, in terms of seeing one group as controlling the belonging of another group. So in other words, men and women, men exteriorize, they externalize, not exteriorize, they externalize their identity, and women externalize their agency. And if you look at throughout history, this is consistent with a master class externalizing their agency and a slave class externalizing their identity. So there are some asexual, completely unrelated to masculinity and femininity components of this that are, I think, entirely due to socialization, and because of that can be opposed successfully on a psychological level, by individuals, and hopefully if you get a critical mass of individuals who oppose it on a psychological level, that will affect the society as well. But that's something that requires a bit more time to explain and get into than we have right now. So I think we'll move on to the next question. It's a long argument. Me and Karen could argue this for in fact, we should probably have a hangout in which we just have a cat fight over this issue. Yeah, but we need to move on to another.
I have no problem. I have no.
Yeah. You have no problem. And then you cut out there.
I have no problem. I have no problem acknowledging that it's part of it is cultural, part of it is socialization. And but I think that given our biology, we're uniquely vulnerable to that. I don't think that you would ever find that dynamic flip the other way.
Again, this is something that we could argue for, I think, a lot longer than we have now, because we got a really long series of questions. Suffice to say, I think I can make the counter argument there, but it would take some time to explore and all. If it's interesting facet, we can devote like an entire show or a Google Hangout to the issue of nurture versus nature. But I do want to move on to another question, because we appreciate people asking their questions and try to get as many on as we can, right? This one is from, I believe, Rachel. What are we doing to try and get more unbiased scientific studies performed? Something like blind studies where people don't know the gender attached to the data. I assume this is in reference to, and clarify if in the chat room, please, Rachel. Is this in reference to studies on domestic violence and rape, or is it in reference to something else? And maybe we can go forward with answering that question. And until she answers that or clarifies that, let's move on to a different question. Would the men's rights movement be served by funding lobbyists the same way the National Organization of Women and other feminist groups do? I'll let you guys fight that one out. Would men's rights activists be served by funding lobbyists?
I don't think so. I don't think so. Well, I mean, they might be served by it, but I don't think that they would be served to the extent that feminists are served by their funding of lobbyists. Michael Parrott of Victims of Immigration Fraud, who financed my trip to the National Organization for Women conference a couple of years ago, because he said that everybody needs to immerse themselves in the crazy at least once. He brought because it was right near D.C., it was in Baltimore, and he had spent the weekend lobbying in D.C. about VAWA was up for renewal, and he wanted changes made to the immigration clauses in that so that men wouldn't end up losing their homes and their livelihoods and their freedom on a single allegation of domestic violence from a foreign spouse who would then be given all kinds of financial and legal assistance and be fast-tracked for citizenship. So it was like a huge incentive in the legislation to people who would want to maybe take advantage of that and make a false accusation. And he said he brought 7 male victims of this type of fraud and 1 female victim, and none of the politicians he talked to had even 20 seconds to spare for the male victims. They all wanted to talk to the female victim. And so if you're going to make the case that men are being harmed by something, as a gender, as a class, as a sex, you're just not going to get the attention, the same attention that women will get when you say women are being harmed by it. You're just not. It's just not going to happen. The only thing that I think that would really work is passive resistance, putting one's foot down and not complying, and maybe shaking things up and getting people making people a little bit uncomfortable. But all of those things are not necessarily, you know, you really have to demonstrate. You have to demonstrate that, say, lifetime alimony is harmful to women because a man's second wife is harmed by the fact that he has to pay lifetime alimony to somebody. I mean, like, this is how you have to phrase it and how you have to frame it in order to get any action on it. So I don't think that lobbying is going to be necessarily very, very effective for men. What do you have to say, Hannah?
I think you're right. I don't think lobbying is going to be a helpful thing. Now, demonstrating as a group that men's rights advocates can be a voting bloc would be a different story, because that's the hiring and firing of politicians. And I'm going to differentiate here between politicians and civil servants. They do the same, or they hold the same titles, but they don't do the same jobs. There are very, very, very few civil servants in politics and a lot of politicians. And so you kind of have to think of politics in a way from the politician's perspective as a giant popularity contest. And they get up there to sell their ideas, but they're also selling themselves. And it's more convincing to them that your interests mean something or should mean something to them if they feel like you can kick them out of office than it is if you can convince them that somebody is going to benefit or be damaged based on those thoughts and ideas. That's a bigger deal. And the other end of that then is getting the information out. Constant discussion. You know, you see a news story and you see a perspective expressed that you think is intellectually dishonest or mistaken. Either way, say something. Comment on the news story. Get into an argument with a feminist. Go to discussion forums. Talk about it at your school if you're a student. You know, don't keep your mouth shut necessarily when you're with friends. And this is really what we need to do more than anything right now. Is the public awareness is going to make a much bigger difference than trying to pay somebody to convince a politician that they should take a course of action.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on to the next question. This one's a little bit more incendiary. Question: how can the average guy not consider most women contemptible, as they not only have huge advantages and are silent out of profit and advantage? Amoral slime in general, especially the mothers. Yeah, it's in some ways I struggle with that myself, actually. I'll be brutally honest. In many ways, I agree with that sentiment. I'm definitely not proud of it, but when I look around me and I see how many women have destroyed their families, stripped their children from their fathers, and demanded alimony and child support, and not just that, but just the whole idea that you can't actually criticize women because they're such a precious group of people, or we're such a precious group of people beyond criticism. And I said on Reddit one time that the pedestal creates the monster. The reality is that women I believe in this situation. I'm sure Karen has a different belief, and she'll definitely tell you. But I think the socialization for women to abdicate their agency leads them to be able to do some incredibly heinous things. And I'm trying not to think of it as something being innate to women, which may be why I resist the biological argument, and see it as something that's socialized, and in an aspect, it's almost like biology taking on, through particular aspects of socialization, taking on a really, really dark turn, as opposed to just being pure biology. So, for example, there's sort of a tendency psychological and just because of biological realities for girls to have a stronger sense of internal identity, because of course they're consistent with the mother figure, which is our original experience of essentially God, and so that they have that internal strength in terms of their identity, and from that slight advantage, slight biological advantage, you can spin out a lot of very negative effects by creating a force multiplier, a socialization force multipliers. From that biological reality, you can create a lot of much more ugly social realities. And I'm going to hand it off to Karen because I know she's probably going to tear that to shreds. So there you go.
You know,
go ahead, Karen.
I don't think I'm going to tear it to shreds. I don't think so. You know, I think that there is a biological basis, you know, in terms of women or girls, females being more likely to be passive in certain situations and wait for other people to act on their behalf, right? And this would be a very, very justifiable and understandable survival skill, you know, that would have been selected for evolutionarily. But I do think that the culture amplifies all of that. I really, really do. I mean, like I said, it was Jordan Peterson in it was in a Agenda with Steve Paikin TV Ontario panel discussion. He said that if you go 30 years ago and you make the prediction based on the cultural construction hypothesis, right? You would predict that as society becomes more modern and egalitarian, differences between men and women become smaller. And what has happened is the exact opposite. Differences between men and women become larger. Differences between men and women in personality and job choice and career choice and interest and all of that in the Scandinavian countries are wider than they are in China or Iran or India, right? And this is because there are no natural constraints on our biology anymore, right? Even looking at it, there's, you know, you're not allowed to slut shame anymore. You're not allowed to shame single mothers anymore. You're not allowed to, you know, to judge women's behavior in any way. If she wants to wear what she wants to wear, and she wants to go where she wants to go, and she wants to drink as much as she wants, and behave however she likes, and you're not allowed to judge her, and then she is free to act on pure impulse, right? So I think culture plays a huge role. I think permissive cultures make bad women. I really do. I think that permissive cultures also make bad men, right? Like they make men who are not interested in contributing to society, not interested in being sort of productive members of the community, not interested in putting anyone's interests but their own, you know, into priority, right? Like I think that culture has a huge role to play, but when you look at a free-for-all culture, then and you release all constraints, then you've got what we have now, which is a disastrous hookup culture that leaves a lot of women feeling unsatisfied, and a lot of men, the men who are hooking up feeling great, and the men who aren't hooking up at all and can't get sex or relationships at all feeling shitty. You have this, you know, like you have this huge permissive culture that just lets us act on our most base instincts, and I think so. I think that maybe human nature is basically bad, right? I think that maybe human nature is basically bad. At least male and female nature acting in concert without any constraints whatsoever, without any external anything applying pressure. I think that maybe we suck, right? And maybe that's, you know, of course culture has a role to play. Of course it does.
It might actually be the nature of all all life in general. Living things are lazy. If you take an animal out of the wild, and selfish, yes. If you take an animal out of the wild and you put that animal in a place where the animal no longer has to struggle and can have all the food it wants and can sleep anytime it wants and doesn't have to fight for a place to be safe and all that, the animal will get sluggish and fat and bored and start doing things that are you know, I mean, I'm describing some people's cats in the audience. I know I am, and their dogs too. And then obviously they're not taken out of the wild; they're taken out of the pet store. But you know, it's the same thing. If you don't challenge people, we are lazy fucks, and we will not excel, and we won't necessarily just not excel in the field of achievement. We won't excel in the field of morals either. And that's something that you're seeing with women today, that you're seeing to a lesser extent with men, because there are areas where men are held morally accountable and women aren't.
Yeah.
In the same area, and there's a lot of them. And I think that's part of the reason why that contempt may be there, because you're seeing women not being held accountable for their actions, and their response to that is the same as any other form of enabling. If they're not accountable, then there's no reason to eschew destructive tendencies.
Yeah. Before we go on to the next question, I just wanted to say I think that there's an assumption that you're making, Karen, in what you're saying about the different cultures, and that assumption is that Western culture is more gender neutral than traditionalist cultures. If you actually think about it, traditionalist cultures, both men and women are subordinate to the tribe. So being male or being female is essentially just a role, but your main role is using whatever particular skills you have, being male or female, to benefit the tribe as a whole. So the overall arcing role is actually neutral. It doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman. Your main role in life is to benefit the tribe as a whole. So that may actually be a more gender neutral approach to men and women than what we have in the West, which is, I don't know what it is, just do whatever makes money, I guess. Or makes money in the materialist world. So I would question that the West really is more gender neutral.
I would agree with your assessment that men and women both had obligations to society. What I'm getting at when it comes to more modern and more egalitarian is that opportunities are more open to everybody, right? So everybody has more of an opportunity to do what they want to do, right? And there you see a greater spread of choices, a greater disparity of interests, all of that stuff, right?
But again,
I absolutely think that what we need is for men and women to, if society's going to survive, for men and women to actually have a sense of obligation towards society, right? But I don't think that it's fair to hold men to that and not women. I don't feel that that's fair at all.
And I would agree with that. But what I disagree with is this idea that what's happening is necessarily a greater divide in masculinity and femininity. I wonder if the female role in the West is really simply what every human being wants and would pursue if they had the ability to do so. Because you look at studies where men would significantly scale back their work and their ambition if women didn't actually care about that. If mate choice wasn't an issue, men would probably work less. And there's a number of men who would rather, how many men would prefer to stay home part-time and work part-time and spend more time with their kids and engaging in leisure pursuits? I mean, that's like the way that we evolved. It was to do maybe 3 hours of work a day and spend the rest of our time raising our kids and shitting around playing games, right? Just creative loafing. Yeah. That is the kind of life that every human being wants, but only women get to have in our society. And I wonder if the so-called difference in the genders is simply due to facilitating women, having the role that all humans were designed to have. So it's not really a gender difference. It's more of a difference in compulsion. Sorry,
Yeah.
I think we can move to the next question since we're all in agreement, and that's boring. I think. Okay, when can we expect enough support from women to advance to a legal counselor sex worker? And how can we motivate action on this huge male social need? I assume this question is about legalizing prostitution. And when that would occur. Well, I can't give you an estimation on when we're going to legalize prostitution or if, but certainly the sex workers would like to see this happen. All of the women and men actually involved in the industry are definitely interested in legalizing sex work, but the feminists.
There's another group of people who are interested in legalizing sex work, and that is extremely disabled people, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of them they are incapable of attracting a partner, whether it's because they are not attractive to the opposite sex, or to the sex of their preference, or whether it's because they just don't have the kinds of opportunities they can't function in the arenas where you would go out seeking a partner, right? So dating is really difficult for them. Intimacy, physical intimacy. I mean, like some of these people, they're 30, 35 years old. They've never been kissed. They don't have any access to intimate touching, and eventually a lot of them end up hiring a sex worker to give them that, because they, who wants to die a virgin just because you have spina bifida, right? Or cerebral palsy? Who wants to live a sexless existence just because you have a handicap? And if this is the way that people in that position can have access to physical sexual intimacy, right? Like I find it really, really cruel to say that it's illegal for you to hire a sex worker. I also find it really cruel to imply, which feminist laws on incapacitation and consent are going, to imply that the sex worker that the person hired is breaking the law by raping the person who hired them. So I mean, like you have this double whammy of sex workers sex work being illegal, and then you have also the idea that somebody who is not 100% functional, 100% at capacity for whatever, being unable to consent, right? And so you're basically cutting an entire group of people off of having any kind of sexual life.
Yeah, and they don't think about these consequences in their crusades. Well, feminists are thinking about consequences. That's not going to ever happen.
Because they don't have to bear them.
No, they don't.
The consequences go on to somebody else.
And that's really been the female role throughout history, is that they don't have to bear the consequences, either the consequences of their protection or provision, or in our society, the consequences of their own ridiculous actions. All right. This is from Sandwich Heist. Question. If feminists are so dead set on enthusiastic consent, how come they are against pornos? Aren't pornos where you'll find the most enthusiastic sex? Yes. Yes. Oh,
Depends
yes.
on the porno. It depends on the porno.
Yeah, that is true.
Personally, I think that university men should sort of hold a work to rule strike, And anytime a woman shows interest in having sex with them, they need to say to that woman, okay, but I have to have your enthusiastic consent. So now you're going to get out your pom-poms, and then you're going to get down on your knees and beg. Just so I know I'm not raping you. Right?
I agree with that.
Because this is really, yeah, you know, like how it's only through some kind of collective job action that men are going to actually knock some common sense into this bullshit, right? I have to get enthusiastic consent? Okay, I'm not going to, you know, trip all over myself trying to beg her to give me enthusiastic consent. No, I'm just going to say, you know what, get out your pom-poms, perform a cheer, and then beg me. Show me you're enthusiastic. Otherwise, it's not happening because I'll be raping you.
Yeah.
Right?
I
And
would
then
tend
when
to
enough
agree.
women complain.
But what really pisses me off about the feminist framing is that they seem to think that men don't want this to begin with. Of course, what man wants a starfish? This is what men have always wanted, and they've had to tolerate women's lack of enthusiasm. Anyway, let's move on to the next question.
What healthy man or woman wants to have sex with somebody who is only doing it while staring at the ceiling and thinking of England?
Yeah, nobody wants an unresponsive partner.
Like, nobody wants to not be desired. Nobody wants to be rejected. But okay, go ahead anyway because, oh, fine, it's Tuesday. Right? Like, you know, like, people, this is not how human beings work, men or women. Women want to be desired. Men want to be desired. A lot of men I know get really turned off if they think that you're not completely into it. You know, like, I don't understand how this is an issue. I really don't.
You know, to be honest, that's something that, it's another area where men have been mistreated that probably doesn't get talked about very much. But somewhere along the line in the shaping of female society over the last couple centuries, this notion has come forward that women are not supposed to be enthusiastic about sex. And so the idea of a woman showing that she does desire her partner and treating him as a human being in bed and actually considering his sexual experience and not just her own, it just seems to have gone completely by the wayside. And men deserve as much as a woman does. I mean, it's should be an equal thing. You know, this is something that feminists should be on board with. They're all about equality, to have that equal consideration for their experience, their sexual experience. And how can it possibly really and truly be an intimate experience if both sides of the experience aren't considering each other and what each other are experiencing? I mean, that's a huge portion of the fun of a sex act, is getting that response from your partner. And it's really a huge shame for both sexes that that's been treated as something that women don't do. And at that point, it's not so much about just consent as whether or not this is a two-way street, whether or not this experience is something that people are sharing with each other. You know, feminists treat sex as something men do to women instead of something fun that men and women do together. It's like they're dead set to destroy it. And the partner.
Well, and they act like they're advocating for a system where men and women do get together, right? But that unfortunately we're just not quite there yet, even though we've probably been there for like millennia.
Yeah.
Right. So.
Okay, I'm gonna just interject here because Rachel has been desperately trying to get our attention. She has clarified that she's talking about studies in regards to rape and violence. And her question is, again, what are we doing to try and get more unbiased scientific studies performed, something like blind studies, while people don't know the gender attached to the data? Well, in this case, with domestic violence and rape, you'd have to get it so that the actual statisticians don't know which gender they're. I wouldn't know how to get rid of the problems that Mary Koss and her troupe of Mary rape apologists injected into the CDC, the Center of Disease Control's National Intimate Partner and Sexual Violence Survey, because essentially the statistics are all fine. It's unbiased. There are a few wording problems, so that made to penetrate is actually apparently more tightly onto what we would consider rape than rape is. So, in other words, it really didn't include situations where men were drunk, because the wording was so ambiguous that it most likely excluded those situations with the made to penetrate. The wording about the trying to capture the sex while drunk was ambiguous, and it did not appear to include men who were forced to envelop or forced to penetrate while drunk. So, in other words, the made to penetrate stat, if anything, is actually closer to our idea of forced sex than the rape stat is. So, yeah, in order to get more unbiased studies done, we'd really have to not allow the polemicists to start redefining terms and juggling things around, and it really isn't at the level of gathering data, it's at the level of reporting it where the real distortion happens. Wait, Karen, Hannah wants to talk. Go ahead, Hannah.
Okay.
The one thing I want to say is that what we are doing at this point to make this change is not letting them get away with quoting and acting on bias studies without pointing out the bias. That is what we're doing at this point. At this point, we are drawing attention to the problem because at this point, nobody has paid attention to it. That's it.
Yeah, and that's pretty much all you can do at this point.
This is the thing is, you know, like I read a quote by a researcher into a guy who wanted to do research on male suicide. What are the causes? What are the factors? What are the risks, right? And he said, I dare you to apply for a grant for that. See what happens, right? There really is a top-down reluctance. Murray Strauss even wrote about a UN study, right, that they did on teen dating violence. And the first 4 countries, it was a whole bunch of countries that they were doing surveys in, the first 4 countries came in with their preliminary results, and he read the results, and it showed that girls were slightly more likely to be physically violent with their dating partners than boys, and you know, self-reporting that they were violent, right? Not just boys reporting that their girlfriends were violent, but girls also reporting that they were violent more often than boys, right? And when he was really looking forward to the full report, and when the full report came out, question 38 was eliminated. It was gone, right? All of the questions relating to female perpetration on men were gone, right? And the preliminary results included Jordan and Namibia, right? Like it was countries, 2 countries that are certainly not modern in our sense of they're not Western countries. They're not modern Western democracies, right? So, I mean, you're looking at a situation where the funding is not there. Nobody wants to freaking look at it, and the only solution to that, the only way that we can get people to actually start being unbiased and start, you know, giving grants to do this research is by generating public awareness with what's available now, right? With the studies that are available now, generating public awareness, getting it to the point where the next bias study that comes out, nobody's going to freaking buy it. Nobody's going to freaking, you know, there's going to be tons of people saying, I guarantee you they didn't ask men about their victimization and they didn't ask women about their perpetration, or they jiggered the freaking definitions so that male victims were excluded, right? That people are going to be in the know. The lay people are going to be in the know, and they're not going to allow the academics and the researchers and the people who give grants to feed us biased information. That's the only way we're going to do it. So
I would tend to agree that there has to be a social movement that expects honesty and transparency from these researchers before unbiased research actually has a chance of happening. But let's move on to the next question because we still have quite a few to go through. Does all this feminist madness begin or stem from education and then expand into the wider culture? Let's bring Hannah on because she's been quiet and I want to put her on the spot. Come on, Hannah.
Does it begin with education?
Does it begin with education or stem from education and then expand into the wider culture? So does it begin with it?
I don't believe it begins with education. I mean, if you're talking about essentially the entire feminist theory, all of the problems that go along with that, the patriarchy theory, rape culture theory, and all that, it isn't that education began that. They have used the education system to promote that, but this is basically the entirety of feminist theory has been created by a bunch of women sitting around and whining about how tough they have it and coming up with buzzwords to describe it. And honestly, I started doing a little research into the funding of mainstream feminist organizations, and I happened upon, going through links, news stories about the funding of the start of women's studies as an academic area of study. And the first women's studies program, and I don't remember what university it was, but was started by a grant from the Ford Foundation after the Ford Foundation became a more left-wing funding organization. Now that does not make feminism left-wing. Feminists will exploit right political wing attitudes at the drop of a hat. They will exploit whatever social attitudes will get them what they want. But yeah, the whole of feminist theory became more well known because of that. But those theories were there, that there had to be something for the individuals trying to get that grant to sort of sell the Ford Foundation on. They give us this money to start this idea, to start this area of study, and we'll spread it outward. But no, it didn't start with academia. It just, as with everything else they do, they simply found an area they could exploit, and that's what they did.
Yep. Let's move on to the next question. This is the question. It seems to me that the multifaceted attacks on feminism have made on men and masculinity will eventually cut into our capacity to ride out and buffer against society-wide issues. So I'll throw that out to someone to respond. Karen, that seems like it's right up your alley.
Yeah, no, I'll happily respond to that. Feminism definitely weakens the fabric, the cohesiveness of society. You even look at the Mosuo in China, which is sort of billed by a lot of feminists as a matriarchal culture. The only part of that culture that is matriarchal, that is female-dominated, is the peasant class, the serf class. Their form of social organization was historically feudal, and the upper classes, the elite ruling class, always had normal monogamous marriage with men and women living together and raising their children together, and all of, and some anthropologists and sociologists feel like believe that the matriarchal system, the no marriage system, the single mother system, was imposed on the lower classes by the elites in order to neutralize threats to their power, right? Because having a society arranged in that way meant that it was fundamentally weak and could be dominated. And so you look at what we have now, And we are all, I mean, government is 100 times minimum bigger than it was before women's suffrage, right? We are 100 times more in debt, right? And still accumulating debt, and we, you know, we really are not fundamentally, we are not a society. You know, like you used to look at when a natural disaster hit and the ability of a community to just come together just sort of automatically and help each other out and rebuild and blah, 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 right? And now we depend on institutional systems, right, that we're helpless without them. We, you know, if we call 911 and no one answers, we don't even know what to do, right? Because we're so dependent now on the government. We are so dependent now on these institutions, and we don't have a strong fundamental unit in our society anymore. Like only 50% of or 30, 40, 50%, 50, 60% of kids are being raised in intact families. You know, like we don't have what we used to have. That, you know, like the zombie apocalypse is going to hit, and a lot more of us are going to die off now than maybe would have 200 years ago.
Yeah. Well, I like that point that you made, that the elites encouraged fatherlessness in order to remove a population's ability to resist them and actually enslave them.
Yeah.
I think that's a really salient point, and we should think deeply about that. But we're going to move on to the next question. What is the politicization of male nature? And this is from Mickey's Shrugged. I'm not exactly sure what this question is referring to when it says the politicization of male nature, but I'm going to throw it out to to Hannah and Karen. Perhaps you guys have some insight.
According to feminists, it's rape.
Yeah.
Rape and violence.
Okay.
Well, I would say, yeah, they've come up with a description for their concept of male nature and politicized that description as a way, a thing to exploit, you know, to counter against female victim status, to exploit for pushing for laws, policies, social standards, anything that they can.
One of the things that I find most interesting, though, is that if you look at the, like, the canon of Western literature, if you look at sort of the body of classical literature, which is male writers, defining masculinity according to a male standard, right? What you find is the easiest way to identify the bad guy is if he mistreats women, right?
Yep.
And if he does that, when he gets his throat cut, or gets disemboweled, or gets run over by a tram, or gets, you know, stabbed in the heart, or whatever, right? You feel, you know, you're supposed to feel like he got what was coming to him, right? This is the ideal of masculinity according to men, right? Is protecting and providing for women, you know, controlling and putting down the bad guys, right? Dealing with evil, protecting the community, right? All of these things, that's all traditional masculinity as defined by men. Then you have this entire genre of fiction, the very first genre of fiction that became dominated by women writers and written to a female audience, right? Female readership. And what is it? 50 Shades of Grey, right? All those 80s romances, 1980s romance novels where the hero raped the heroine, and by the end he'd convinced her that he was really a good guy after all, and then they fall in love and they get married, right? So, like, I really think that women's politicized idea of masculinity, feminist politicized idea of masculinity, is projection. It's projection, right? Men don't write rapey romances. You just don't.
Well, that's a good point.
Even when you look at porn, right? you know, there has to be some kind of, you know, aspect of she wants what's happening to her, right? You know, she wants to be doing this. She's eager for it. She's enthusiastic. She's, you know, she's opening his pants and she's happy and surprised by what she finds there, right? Like, you know, like there's an aspect of that is like completely non-rapey, and yet so much of female porn, right? Female targeted porn is totally rapey.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's a situation where male-targeted porn is really about a woman desiring a man sexually to the
Yes.
point of losing all control, but not. Well, maybe I guess there is some rape fantasy there for men too. I think that, and I'm not talking about raping women. I'm talking about being raped. And it's still a fantasy, so it isn't real. But
there's a bit of both. I think I think that there's an element of in female targeted porn that is about, you know, being the rapist.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is male targeted erotica. Like they did do a study that found that men actually preferred a erotic scenario in which the woman was the aggressor, and
yes.
it was a scenario in which technically we would view her as being somewhat, at least somewhat, to use the feminist term, rapey. But
what that basically means is that both sexes in their erotica prefer a scenario where the preferred sex desires them so much that they lose all control. It's just when women write it, they conceive of it as rape, and when men write it, they don't. And what that says more about women is that lack of agency, that women have that imperative to not be a willing participant, because if you're a willing participant, then you're doing something bad, and it's that lack of responsibility.
I think
what leads to that.
I think for some reason human beings sort of have this like I don't know, desire to be physically forced. It's almost like I'm analyzing it from the outside because I don't think I've ever understood it as a person who's experienced it, but it seems to be really common with men and women. They both have ravishment fantasies. The difference is that, I don't know, I think women play more games, more mind games, and just
I think the difference is that women project their ravishment fantasies onto men in general, and sort of fear being ravished, right, by men in general, right? Like any man, not just the man of their choosing in their fantasy, but any man, right? And men understand that it's a fantasy, and they don't project it onto women, and they have no assumption or expectation that the average everyday woman, no matter what she looks like, from Angelina Jolie to Alice the Goon, she's not going to jump his bones and ravish him, right? Like that they don't have those and this is what it's unrealistic expectations, right? But it's unrealistic expectations that are imputed onto the target, right? Men don't do it because it's unrealistic. Men don't impute those onto the target. Women tend to impute those unrealistic expectations onto the target, and they unrealistically expect that men are going to rape them, and it's just not the case. It's just not how things go.
Well, it's a desirability power fantasy, I think, with women. Whereas I think with guys, there was a thought that I had that has now actually fled my brain, so I may just be rambling on for a bit here. But with guys, when they well, and you know what? I feel bad because I'm like talking for men. These are just my observations, so feel free to correct me in the Honey Badger radio chat. It's like men don't assume that kind of universal desirability. And they seem to have the ability to separate between what they might like and or what they might fantasize about and what women might actually be like. Whereas women seem to be in many cases seem to be unable to do that, which is I think one of the reasons why romance novels leads to less relationship dissatisfaction. And I always find it ironic that feminists go after porn for that when it really isn't porn, it's romance novels that lead to it.
Well,
but
it's solipsistic. It's assuming that what I feel is the way the world is how it is. How the world affects me is how the world is.
Yeah.
Right? Or how I feel about the world is how the world is.
Yeah, exactly.
So that
and you're right, they're more willing to project this onto every man, whereas men are much more reasonable in their estimations of their desirability. Well, maybe not. They may be going the other way in all of this. But let's move on to the next question. And if I remember what it was I was going to say, then I will say it. But I'm not going to witter on any further. Question: based on nature versus nurture, Barbar recently posted about epigenetics and traits being brought out because of environment specifically. Any thoughts? Well, I could take that one. I think epigenetics is a very valid thing to look into because environment does shape gene expression. We don't know how much at this point in time and what the feedback loop is, but it is true that depending on how you approach life, your psychological states, the food that you eat, the kind of environment you live in, if it's stressful, if it's calm, whatever, that does shape your genetics. It has to have measurable effects on your genetics. I don't know if that's inheritable. Then we're getting into the Lamarckian.
Well, it is heritable. It is, well, no, I don't think that the particular expression of somebody's genes is heritable based on environment is heritable in the next generation. No, the genes themselves are heritable. One of the things that strikes me is that like girls who grow up in fatherless homes tend to menstruate earlier or than if they have a father in the home, and that would be an epigenetic outcome, right? And that would be, and there's certainly a viable and plausible evolutionary reason for that to be the case. If there's no father in the home, the best interest of a girl would be to attach herself to a man as quickly as possible, to a protector and a provider as quickly as she can, right? And so mature to, reach sexual maturity as early as you can and find a mate. Given the environment that we evolved in, not the environment now, but the environment that we evolved in. But you look at epigenetics, and the nature. Like I really hate the idea of presenting it as nature versus nurture, right? Because it's not a versus thing. I mean, this is the thing. This is one of the things that has driven me crazy is that people who adhere to a cultural constructivist model of gender, right, and sex differences, they seem to think that the position that it's all culture is the moderate position, and the position that it is, some of it is inherently biological, and then the culture either counteracts it or reinforces it, right, or amplifies it, or really pushes back. Those of us who think that it's a combination of both, we are the extremists, right? Somehow we are the extremists and we are the bio-truthers, right? Because we accept that there is some biological basis in addition to culture. And, I have no problem with accepting, there's always going to be questions as to how much of it is culture, right? But obviously, if you look at the differences between the sexes in China or India or Iran, as far as the, job choices and stuff like that between men and women, and then you go to the Scandinavian countries and you find that it's completely different when people are more free to make the choices that they want because they have the economic freedom to just do what fulfills them, right? You have to accept that there is a cultural factor at play. Of course there is, right?
Yeah. And really, it does just come down to which is it? Is it culture, or well, how much? And really, the only reason to ask these questions is to figure out the best solution to creating. I don't know. I don't want to use the word equal, but an equitable society.
Yeah. No. Like the thing is, if it would take, how much coercion is it going to take in order to get people to, men and women, to behave as if they're completely the same? How much coercion on the part of the state, on the part of society, how much coercion, how much denying men opportunities, how much giving women affirmative action, how much shaming of housewives, how much, looking down on the motherhood role, how much how much of this, is it ethical that we apply these pressures to people when we don't have to, just because the outcomes are not what we would want to see, right? We want to think that in a society with equal opportunities, we're going to have equality of outcome, and the reality is that the more equality of opportunity there is, the less equality of outcome there is. How much coercion are you willing to put into that equation? How much limiting of one group's opportunities are you willing to engage in order to give the other people a chance to succeed? Right? Like, how ethical is that? How humane is that?
Okay, Hannah, quick comment, and then we need to move on to the next question.
No, I think another aspect of that is in the discussion on equality of opportunity versus equality of outcome, and this kind of gets ignored. How are we defining equality of outcome? Because if you look at how a lot of what I would call the victim politics groups define equality of outcome, is as if people are doing the same things and receiving the same things, but they don't talk about experiencing the same things, particularly satisfaction, personal achievement, contentment in one's life, living the way one wants to live. And this is something that feminists really screw women over on when they start trying to push women into professional areas that women don't necessarily want to go into. We may have feminist-style equality of outcome if we get a 50-50 setup in Congress and a 50-50 setup in every single STEM profession. But if that's not the area that women wanted to work in, or those particular women wanted to work in, is it a satisfactory lifestyle for them? Is it something that they really wanted? Is it something that they're happy with? And are they content in their lives? And is it truly equal if they're pushing these people into something that is going to make them suffer instead of making their lives better? Where maybe men that pursue this because they have a passion for it, their lives are better for being involved. So this whole equality of outcome thing, in a way, to me, it's kind of bullshit because they're pushing their own desires on other people.
Yep.
Well, it's the paradox of the decline of female happiness, isn't it?
Yeah.
Women were more happy in the 60s than they are now.
Well, I wanted to answer your question about how much coercion is acceptable. I would say 0. I would say that if the solution correctly measures out the necessary features that need to be accommodated, it should be a solution that people embrace simply because it improves their lives in the short term and it improves their lives in the long term. And it shouldn't be, there shouldn't be any coercion other than maybe reading a book or looking at a YouTube video or hearing a speech. There should be no other coercion. There should be no financial coercion. There should be no social coercion. There should be no legal coercion. It should be entirely a reasonable solution that people adopt because they can see clearly that it gives them a short-term benefit in terms of their own psychological health, and then a long-term benefit in terms of improving their communities. So my answer to should there be any coercion is no.
No.
And I think that will be the feature of a proper solution, is that there is no coercion. But let's move on to another question. I apologize for cutting you guys off. Mendragora Dragus asks, God, you guys, your names, they kill me. A new male pill is being developed that makes sperm stop swimming. Is this the next battleground, and how much should we focus on it?
It shouldn't be a battleground. That should be something that everybody wants. You know, feminists are supposed to be control, but so far it has been. They have protested it.
You know, I haven't. You know, some feminists that I've read are welcoming it, although they don't trust. They're like, oh, I would welcome it, but I don't trust him to use it. I don't trust him to take a pill every day, or I don't trust him to be honest about it, right? And I think that that is actually more projection because in one poll in a Scottish lifestyle magazine, they did a poll of readers, and they found that 53% of women would lie about birth control in order to get pregnant regardless of their partner's wishes. And I think it was 53%. It was something astronomical like that, more than half. And that 80% admitted to telling life-changing lies. So, I mean, like, you look at that and you think, this is women saying, well, of course I can't be trusted, so why would I trust this guy, right? And what I don't think women are really cognizant of is the terror men have, because like women have a fear of pregnancy, right? But that their fear of pregnancy is mitigated. It's mitigated the entire way. Like they have all kinds of measures to prevent it. Then they have all kinds of measures to prevent an embryo from implanting, right? A blastocyst from implanting, the morning after pill, all of that, right? They have abortion, they have adoption, they have legal abandonment, right? They have all of these options to say, I really don't feel like I'm ready to raise a child. Somebody else do it, right? Men have none, right? Men have condoms, or vasectomy, or abstinence, and even with condoms, if they're not careful, they can still run into problems, right? So you look at it and you're like, men have like no options, and then they are facing, as I've put it before, legally enforceable $100,000 baby mortgages, right? I don't think women really appreciate that, right? That this would weigh on men in a huge way, right? It would weigh on men every time they have sex, and yes, they would take their damn pill to avoid having to pay monthly a third of their earnings for the next 20 years.
And of course, even if you couldn't trust them to take the pill, because
you have your own.
That plethora of other forms of birth control, whose business is it whether he takes it or not? Take your own.
Yeah.
There's nothing to say just because he's on one doesn't mean you can't have one too.
You don't have to trust him. Right now, he's the one who has to trust you.
Yeah.
Right, and that's the really ridiculous thing about the objections and the sort of talking around. Oh, I don't quite trust it. I wouldn't quite trust a guy. You don't have to. Right now, he's the one who has to trust you. Right, if you're going to have sex without a condom, or even sex with a condom, since it's about as reliable as pulling out, which I can guarantee you is not that reliable. You know, like it's, you know, like you don't
Yeah,
have to.
it's ridiculous logic.
Mhm.
And it essentially amounts to just a way to shut men down and prevent them from having a certain amount of control over their own lives. And I'm going to move on to the next question. Have any of you heard of John B. Calhoun's mouse utopia experiments and its consequences? That would be no, although that sounds really fascinating. So if you are still in the chat room, please feel free to chat or to type out some more information on that. But I'll leave that to the others to answer.
I've heard of that, but I don't remember. I don't remember what it was
That is
about.
one that I'm familiar with.
Okay, it sounds like nobody is familiar with it, so we're going to have to move on to the next question. And these ones are pretty much all directed towards Karen.
Okay.
What are Karen's thoughts about Naomi Wolf after meeting her in person? But before we get to that question, why don't you give us some description about what happened to you in New Hampshire?
Oh, let me just, I don't even know where to start. Okay, so I was invited to speak at the Liberty Forum in New Hampshire, and so was Naomi Wolf. She was invited as the keynote speaker, and she was talking on a non-feminism topic about whistleblowers. And the guy who had invited me to speak, he basically was like, well, as long as I have a feminist and an anti-feminist here, might as well get them on a panel, right? So he convinced us both to participate in this panel. And the panel was, it was a little bit of a debacle. The moderator, even at the end, right at the end of the panel, when she's like closing it up, she hinted, she's like, I'm looking forward to your keynote speech in a few hours, Naomi. That is, if you haven't decided whether this is all too much, right? So literally she was worried through the whole thing that Naomi might decide to walk, right, before her keynote speech, that they had, I'm sure, paid a significant amount of money for her to do, not just travel expenses, but a speaking fee, right? I don't know. You all can go and look. There's Liberty Forum, the Free State Project's channel on YouTube. They posted the video, and you can all go have a look. And the comments are almost unanimously calling Naomi out on being full of empty rhetoric and emotional reasoning and hypocrisy and contradiction. You know, she contradicts herself in the same sentence type thing. And why won't the moderator let Karen talk? You know, Naomi's constantly interrupting, right? You know, the moderator sucks, blah, 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 right? I wanted to hear more from Karen and Antigone, who was an anarchist who was participating as well. At one point, Naomi Wolf brought up the fact that men are so rarely prosecuted for rape. And I said, well, okay, so why is that? You know, like, the only thing that separates rape from a perfectly legal act that occurs millions of times a day around the globe, you know, and I was going to go on to say, is two people's states of mind, right? Like, and she turns to me, and her face is just inches from mine. She just says, you're a rape apologist? You're saying rape is okay? And I'm like, no, I'm saying rape is about consent, right? Which is what feminists believe, because feminists have lobbied to remove everything extraneous to consent from the requirements to prove a rape. So You don't need witnesses anymore. You don't need corroboration anymore. You don't need there's no assumption that a woman is not has no right to consent to sex outside of marriage. There is no requirement for evidence of physical resistance, right? Because rape is not about physical resistance, it's about consent, right? And so, of course, when the only thing that differentiates a crime from a legal act is the state of mind of the person or the two people, it's a little bit more difficult to prove, right? And she called me a rape apologist for that. So I thought that was awesome. I feel like I've officially arrived as an anti-feminist because a famous feminist called me a rape apologist, and she was so upset. After we removed our mics and we were all done and were about to leave the hall, I went up to her and said, I can't believe you called me a rape apologist. And she said, well, you certainly sounded like one. And I said, what, for saying rape's about consent? And then she's like, I can't even discuss this with you. I was raped. I can't even talk about this. Right? Which kind of made me think, if you can't talk about rape with another human being because you have issues, personal issues around it, you know, like if you require that a conversation be a monologue, then maybe you don't belong in the conversation, right? So, like, I have no problem hearing her views on rape, or anybody else's views on rape, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, but she can't handle it, and she'll shut everything down that even remotely challenges her views on it, and demand that the conversation stop right there. So.
Yep. That's very true, and there's some things that are a bit ridiculous about what she said. First of all, when women report rape, rape is just as likely as any other violent crime to result in a conviction. And second of all, she was just called a rape apologist for defending Julian Assange. You'd think that she would have learned something from that, but apparently not.
Oh, but Julian Assange is good looking and rich. So that's different.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on to the next.
He defended Dominic Strauss-Kahn too. Rich, powerful.
Rich and powerful. As long as he's attractive, he deserves the benefit of the doubt. Apparently.
There you go.
It seemed like Naomi Wolf did very little to prepare herself, or even bother to learn about the other guests at the conference. Karen, do you think she was surprised with what you two had to say?
Oh yeah.
What you had to say.
I don't think that. Yeah, no, I don't think she was prepared for anybody to open up the panel discussion with Theodore Roosevelt's 1904 campaign to bring back the whipping post exclusively for wife batterers back when beating your wife was socially acceptable according to feminists, right? Like, she wasn't expecting that. And like, her body language, because she was very, very, like, when we first met before the panel, she was very friendly and very welcoming and very, you know, and she's just like, you're an anti-feminist? Like, what did we do to you? And I was like, you didn't do anything to me, right? Like, you didn't do anything bad to me. Just to, you know, people I know. But, you know, like, so she's like, I have the feeling we're going to agree on a lot of things. And then things happened, and it didn't turn out that way. I don't think, you know, even just her reaction to me calling her wealthy, she got so offended. I think if she actually knew that I was a waitress, a part-time waitress with 3 kids, she would not have felt. She may have wanted to be offended by me calling her wealthy, but she would not have felt like she had social permission to be offended by it. Because obviously I make about 1/10 what she makes, right? So, you know, I have a right to call her wealthy. you know, compared to me, right? And she would not have felt she could get away with that if she knew anything about me. But she didn't know anything about me at all. She hadn't done any research.
Yeah, and well, the reality is, if you do research, you're not you end up not being a feminist. As I remember when I first, like, people are feminists are convinced, like, I was once a feminist when I was a stupid kid, but because I had a dedication to reason and trying to be a good person, I questioned a lot of my assumptions, and I did research on them, and I gradually, everything that I believed from feminism just eroded out of my mind, because it just doesn't face up to the twin solvents of having or wanting to have a strong moral core and wanting to live your life in a reasonable and intelligent way. If you can't be a feminist in those two things, because at some point
you can't be honorable.
Even if you say, well, I still believe in the tenets of feminism about equity between the genders, at some point you realize it's a choice between identifying with feminism and giving credibility and weight to all the shit that they do in the name of feminism, or disavowing feminism and helping men and boys just by disavowing feminism and saying, you don't frickin' speak for me, and I disavow you, and this is why.
Yeah.
And that actually, it becomes a question, do you like the label feminism more than you wanted to help men and boys? And at that point, if you're still a feminist, you have no honor. But go ahead, Karen.
Oh, I don't even know whether it's about men and boys so much as about, like, sort of an acceptance of reality. This is really the thing with me. You know, like, I think I even stated in my very first video that part of the reason I do this is, part of it is, you know, that that internet cartoon, you know, someone is wrong on the internet, right? You know, it's 3 a.m., come to bed, I can't, someone is wrong on the internet. It's just wrong. It's just completely fucking wrong. It's backward, it's upside down, it's inside out, it's wrong. And, like, the fact that we're making decisions at the governmental level based on something that's so completely false, right? How can that not be destructive? Like, even if you didn't give a shit about men and boys, even if you didn't fucking particularly give a shit about men and boys, even if you didn't care about women as a group, right, and all the ways that feminism shortchanges them and doesn't give them credit, right, for when they succeed, because, of course, you know, you had to have, you only succeeded because feminism gave you this, right? You know, even if you set all that aside, you have to come to a point where you understand that it's fundamentally not in line with reality, and that espousing a worldview that has nothing to do with reality can only be destructive.
Yep. Well, yeah, and well, for me, it became an issue of what can I do to help, you know, the men who are struggling around me, and ultimately, feminism. How can feminism, as a movement, as a phrase, as a word, mean more than helping people? And for me, it was men and boys, but it's also women too. I do not want to promote this attitude that women are defined by being acted upon by men. It's just, it's a totally disempowering attitude. But let's set that aside and move to the last question. Karen, how are your feels doing after having been labeled a rape apologist? Are you okay?
Oh,
do you need a safe space?
I think I answered that when I answered the last question. I feel like I've arrived. I've officially arrived. I was called a rape apologist by a famous feminist to my face in front of cameras. like, I wanted to do a fist pump. I was just like, especially given the context of it, it was just awesome. It was like the most awesome experience ever. Like, like when she said it, I was just like kind of stunned for a moment. Like, how can you possibly interpret what I'm saying as rape apology? How can you possibly do that? But then afterwards, I was just like, after a couple of seconds, I was like, she totally lost the entire argument right there. Because everybody knows, like, even people in the comments, Naomi Wolf called her a rape apologist for making a factual statement. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's a signal that the discussion needs to be over because I have nothing to say. I have nothing to answer. I have no answer for no way to address what you're talking about, right?
Yeah.
It's basically surrender. It's basically admitting defeat. It is an attempt to, and sometimes it's successful, it's an attempt to deliver a lethal blow.
Mm-hmm.
Right? But not if you're willing to power through it, and not if you're not prepared to be intimidated by it. So yeah, no, my feels are just fine. And I have the feeling that if Naomi Wolf is ever asked to be on a panel discussion with me again, she'll decline.
Yeah, most likely.
Maybe not, but probably.
Okay, actually, I found another question. Is Naomi Wolf the outcast of feminism, or just as batshit crazy as any rad femme?
Both.
How is that possible?
Both.
How could she?
both.
How could she
No.
simultaneously
She's
be outcast from feminist and still be everything wrong with feminism?
She's completely batshit crazy, and the things that make her an outcast are the few areas where she's sane. So the few areas where she's like, we need to really focus on due process and not rush to judgment in rape accusations, and really let the evidence speak for itself, and not make judgments before we see the evidence, right? That will lead her to be outcast from feminism. The freaking batshit insane stuff, like working class women invented feminism, and all of this other bullshit that there's a great organization called Man Up. That's how we're dealing with violence against men, is by creating an organization called Man Up that teaches men not to be violent with women and children. Oh, and men. Like, all of that batshit insanity, all of that is the only thing that's keeping her even conditionally in the sisterhood. It's the ways that she's sane that are keeping her out, right?
Yeah, it's like a rush to the
And I don't know
bottom.
whether she's exactly sane. Well, I mean, I don't think that her defense of due process and rape accusations and stuff like that, I don't know whether that's sanity or not, because the two people that she has evoked in that context are wealthy, powerful men who would be attractive to women of her socioeconomic status, right? So, like, is she going to defend the same right to due process for a guy who looks like the dude from The Centipede 2?
My spidey senses
I don't know.
suggest no.
There you go.
Yeah, but we're getting towards the end of the episode. Running a bit longer.
We're actually, yeah, we are.
Right.
We're running long.
Yeah, just because we had all that screw up in the beginning, so
That was my fault. That was my fault. I admit
yeah,
it.
it's your fault. And you need to get some headphones, dear, or earbuds or something, because you got a lot of echo.
Yeah,
But,
I need to unpack them. Is the problem?
Yeah,
I haven't unpacked. So
yeah. Why aren't you just completely devoting your entire life to us, Karen? You're out of the sisterhood. Out. Get out. Be gone.
excellent, excellent. So I don't have to.
And you're a rape apologist.
Is that cool? Because I have better things to do. Yeah.
No, it's just oh, anyway. Yeah, it's getting really late. You can tell because now we're getting just silly. Okay. To everybody who's listening on the on Karen's channel and in the chat and currently, please go to the Honey Badger Google Plus page and put Honey Badger Google Plus page into your circles. So in the future, hopefully the near future, we can actually invite you to be part of these Google Hangouts. And that means you can chat with us. Of course, you're still chatting with us in the YouTube channel. But it'll be even cooler because then you can maybe talk to us as well. And so that is at plus.google.com/plus, and that's the real plus, not the word plus, Honey Badger Radio. If you go there now and add us to your circles, that would be good. And you can also find other Honey Badger content on our channel, which is youtube.com/user/honeybadgerradio. And I wanted to thank Phil for the animation, the Honey Badger, Hypno Badger, dubstep redux, even though it seems all hail the Hypno Badger. Even though that's apparently less popular than the 25 seconds of us screwing up a Google Hangout, which everybody seemed to love and find deep meaning in.
And fapping opportunities. That was awesome. Some guy fapped away cancer.
That's amazing. That I get, like, at that point, I mean, how do you take down a complete fuck up that caused someone to cure cancer by fapping? I mean,
I feel like Mother Teresa.
Yeah, let's go with that. Let's go with that. And let's go with that. Okay, I'm gonna let Hannah add anything she wants since she has been so quiet and so politely quiet in her little green square. So do you have anything to add, Hannah, before we call it a day? Say something.
I really had nothing at all on my mind. Absolutely nothing. That cancer thing just totally blew my mind.
You are so lame, Hannah. You are totally out of the
I just completely went
out
blonde.
of the
Oh my God!
yeah,
no. Flat.
Yes, I did make a blonde joke. That was not nice. But it was a bleach
out of the sisterhood, out of the herd. Done. You're done. You're dead.
Yeah, you're
sorry, I'm tired.
Oh Jesus, Karen! But if we throw everyone out of the sisterhood, there'll be no sisterhood.
Oh, that's okay. It'll be a sisterhood
we
of
can't
one.
have the magic sisterhood rituals. That's gonna be so lame.
Wait, we have magic sisterhood.
What do those involve?
You know where we draw down the magic patriarchy powers of the men's rights movement to protect us.
Okay, all right. This has become a silly place.
Okay.
This has become a silly place. I think as the official, I don't know what the hell I am, cuntatrix.
Moderator?
The cunterator.
There we go. The
cunterator. As the official cunterator, I'm calling the proceedings to a close. Thank you to everybody who is watching, and everybody who has signed on to the Honey Badger Radio channel, and thank you to Karen for always tolerating our nonsense, and to Hannah for everything that you do, and to Phil again for animating, to Europa for the wonderful art. Also, thank you to our new artist who will be debuting shortly, hopefully, as soon as I can get the website all up and running properly. And thank you to AVFM for giving us a platform. Well, I guess they didn't give us this particular platform, but they do give us Blog Talk Radio, and in the future, hopefully, we'll be moving to Live 365. And to answer your question, the person who's asking about the Google Hangouts, no, we're not going. Google Hangouts hopefully will not be replacing the radio show, but will be in addition to it. So yes, you will get more Honey Badgers and our zany antics. Hopefully a little less of the zany antics that we didn't intend to do, and a little more of the zany antics that we do intend to do. But, you know, whatever, it's all good. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.